Have you noticed how it seems that literally the people that are constantly attacking you just don't seem to be hinged in reality? Like, this seems to actually be really, really accurate. And there's a few things we have to draw from this. One, essentially all of the left's fears are entirely fake. They're either fake or they're gay. Sometimes they're fake and gay. Often, often it's both. But today we're going to be only addressing the ones that are fake. So when we look at things like their great concerns they're great concerns that are fake, it's really easy to point towards ones that we've experienced the last few years in the presidency. But I'm going to leave the 10,000 Russia conspiracies aside right now. And let's look at a few more relevant ones. So, like right now, one of the things that we're being told is this very, very unfounded, irrational fear of what's going to happen with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So, for instance, let's listen to this gem from Cultural Genius.
The reason abortion came about is because people got tired of tripping over women in bathrooms with hangers in their body. Okay? This was always supposed to be about safe and clean.
Yeah.
Your relationship with God and or my relationship with God, we'll talk to God. God talks to me, God talks to you. You know what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
Whatever you believe. But this idea that you are making hay out of a law that doesn't affect you. Because it doesn't say, listen, if you get pregnant, you better go and have an abortion. It doesn't say that. It says if you find...
Okay, so just pause it there. So this concept that you couldn't go into a bathroom without stepping over women that were having abortions with coat hangers is such this patently absurd, irrational fear. Even the statement about women were having that there were tons of deaths due to illegal abortions before Roe v. Wade is, for the most part, entirely fake. Like it's just a fake narrative. For instance, here I'll show you how many abortions were actually taking place. So there's this statement that there's really no way to know. So a plausible estimate can be 200,000, as high as 1.2 million per year. Were how many abortions were taking place, with a 5,000 death estimate. This is the estimate used for quite a period of time. The unfortunate thing on it is the individual that specifically made this estimate later says that, yeah, he actually kind of lied. This accepted estimate of 5,000 was quite literally like a make-believe thing. And it just was never true. In fact, the real numbers were something near like 200. So yeah, 264 deaths occurred from illegal abortion. Now that's not woman of coat hangers. That's literally an abortion that happened illegally. So a state where maybe even a medical practice gave the abortion. I believe the figure on that was literally like 75% of these were done actually in a medical practice and still amounted to death. When they look at years prior, what they're doing is they're looking at periods where before we even had antibiotics. And so if women were getting illegal abortions, even in a medical clinic, there was a really high death rate just because there was a high death rate for everything before we had modern day antibiotics. So yeah, entirely fake, irrational fear, which is very to be expected, because again, as we'll continue to look and see time and time again, essentially every single fear that they have is a entirely irrational and fake fear that you're supposed to rearrange or restructure your entire world to fit their worldview, which is one that isn't based in reason at all. We'll go to modern day America with racism and hate crimes, as we're told. In fact, we were quite literally told that the biggest threat facing America, the biggest domestic risk facing the entire country, was white supremacy. When Mayorkas was asked to clarify this or give notable cases or reference specifically what she was referring, he couldn't even name one. He was unable to name one. But this is, let's see, this article, 2019. Jason Riley, great fellow. Handful of books that are definitely worth checking out. But political scientists found that fewer than 1 in 3 of the 346 such allegations were genuine. And so anybody that's followed the news over this past year has seen this continually. Everything from a garage pole rope, of which 6 FBI agents were sent to investigate. My guess is the 6 FBI agents sent to investigate the garage pole rope probably are not being assigned to figure out who is illegally protesting in front of Supreme Court justices' houses, as they're currently all assigned to following parents that would like to weigh in on how their kids are educated. Just an assumption there. But garage pole ropes to fake nooses to people that write like swastikas on their own car. The fact is that racism is in such high demand in our country that we're not able to even come up with enough to meet we're not able to come up with enough supply in this country to meet the demand. So we have to generate fake ones, and like this one. But beyond that, we're having to invent literally like new racisms, period. Racisms proper, if you will, like the okay hand sign, or my favorite, which is one that's happened in just the last few days, which is where a reporter referred to a gentleman, I believe, playing sports ball as a knuckle dragger. That I don't know that there's ever been a actually particular context in which this had a racial connotation, but apparently now we've created a new racism when there was a void of racism that was needing to be filled. So we have created this entirely irrational concern of racism in our current state, America. And where we're going to end up going with this, as you're going to see, is there's actually just going to have to be a time that you just tell grifters no. Like, it's not in good faith. Nobody's coming with these concerns. Like, study says actually none of this is in good faith because it's not real. This is a entirely fake reality. Like, they continue to assault your reality and tell you that men are women and men can get pregnant, and that the exact same people are also the ones telling you that America's systemically racist, rotten place that's irredeemable. So what else? This was one of my favorites, which was through a lot of 2020, we were told that there was this, in 2021, there was this like onslaught of hate against Asians. And because clearly the only person capable of expressing hate towards another person is white people, very clearly this must be a white problem assaulting Asians. The really interesting thing is you can look at this data, and for instance here, let me move me out of the way, and what we see actually is for the most part what you would expect to see, which is that most murders especially, is consolidated disproportionately with their own group, which you would expect to see. The deviation of this that's really interesting is actually within the Asian group of this data. What we see is that Asians are responsible for 24% of the murders upon Asians, whites are responsible for 24% of the murders on Asians, and blacks are responsible for 27.5%. Now, this is hard objective data, and to assume that there's some type of white supremacy, nefarious activity at play, we would actually have to believe that the Asians are in on it with the whites and would lie about what they recognize from their perpetrator. And so when you can't explain this using data at all, what you must do is this. This is fantastic. So it goes, why the trope of black-Asian conflict in the face of anti-Asian violence dismisses solidarity. So because there was solidarity against the super terrible white people, we now can dismiss the data, and we can just omit the data and move on to a new reality in which it's actually white people that are the perpetrators of this crime. And the reason that we're talking about this is this onslaught of reality, unfortunately, has a real world effect eventually. So, for instance, in current news this week, there was a guy in 2017, an orange guy, that told us that, that asked a question. He asked a question. So, today it's Lee and Jackson, Stonewall Jackson. Next, are they going to be coming for statues of Washington and Jefferson? And this, I'm going to emulate the way this was probably answered, which was, statues of Washington and Jefferson aren't next, but it's complicated. Historians say. This seems like they always say historians say, or like experts say. New study, experts say men in fact are women. So statues of Washington and Jefferson aren't next. Trump's exact question here was, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I know Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is George Washington next week? Is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You really do have to ask yourself, where is the stop? And this was met with like quite a bit of rebuttal, saying that no, this isn't happening, by the people that live in a entirely like fake alternative reality, this weird dystopian future in which you couldn't go into a bathroom without a woman like performing abortions on themselves with coat hangers, and of which there's like this grave threat of white supremacy around every corner. Like, it's in the room with you right now. It's literally everywhere. Yet the exact same people will look at you and you say, hey, okay, so here's a question. I see the direction this is going, and we're attacking some of our kind of like cultural icons or historical figures from the past and applying a new standard, a new system of morality, one that may have not even been present then, even if we do all adopt it now. But let's retroactively look at our figures from the past and how can we judge them with new light, and then what will be the end implication of that? Are we going to take away figures that were actually a source of cultural unity? There's no reason that a figure like Washington shouldn't actually be a source of cultural cohesion and unity. He's the founder of this country. He's the founder of this country for every single person here. Like, as it turns out, when you live in a multiracial society, what's actually becomes more and more important is going to be embracing shared heritage and shared like icons, figures, leaders, institutions, and symbols. Like, this is actually becomes more and more important, that these elements are shared, because you don't have the same racial solidarity that you see some nations have almost monolithically. So, being that, when you see somebody attack, when you realize that this is like of like utmost importance into a multiracial society, is having shared symbols and icons, and what you see is this direct assault on all of our shared symbols and icons, it's a pretty logical extension of, well, you're going to literally come for all of them, aren't you? And the implication of this is that you hate this country. And the people go, actually, I'm sorry, that's a slippery slope fallacy that you're making right now. And it's just funny because literally, like, all the slippery slope people were right. Like, it seems like almost every slippery slope claim made in recent times was all accurate. Like, for instance, if you went back probably like, I don't know, like 4 hours, no, like a year, 2 years, and said, hey, no, probably we need to go just before the 2020 like election cycle. So if you went back 4 years, what you and were to suggest that you should be promoting transgender. It's weird. I lost things there for a minute. So, anyways, I'll do this again. Okay, all right. So now we're back again. Let's see here. All right. So, yeah, so basically all the slippery slope people end up being accurate. If we went back even just, I don't know, like a couple days, actually like a couple years, and I think it started becoming notable right around the 2020 election cycle, when it was needed for a new class that the government would need to claim was discriminated in this nation. So if you went back just before the 2020 election, asked almost anybody if they thought that you should be transgendering children. Like there would be this basically universal answer of no. And if you suggested that the current transgender argument was going to soon be targeting children, they would tell you were crazy. Oh, it's a slippery slope fallacy. It's a slippery slope fallacy. Well, yeah, again, like all the slippery slope people were basically always right. Like as if this concept that they literally view a different year for the creation of this country. We can't have it in our shared heritage the year that this country began. Even that, we have to have this a new year in their new fictional reality. They have a new year which the country began, and it's a country filled with women crawling over each other with coat hangers in bathrooms, and it's filled with systemic racism, with white supremacy hiding around every corner, and this never-ending like legion of entirely unmerited and literally just entirely fake fears. They needed to add, then the exact same people would look at you if you said, hey, okay, so I see what's currently happening with this transgender discussion, and I'm not sure, what are the guardrails that prevent this from targeting children eventually? They would go, actually, that is a slippery slope fallacy that you're making right now. And then we fast forward a couple of years, and like literally if you don't want to chop like a kid's dick off, then you're considered outside of the best practices by your current government that has state enforced transgenderism and state enforced homosexuality. Like literally you would be the outsider for suggesting like, or they would make you be perceived as the outsider for suggesting that maybe we don't want to start targeting children with medical practices and drugs that will eternally alter their body over feelings. And so what we've seen continually is basically, like you say, all the slippery slope, where almost all people were all right. And all right. And so let's look at another one because it's relevant in our current time, which was, so the Orange Man mentioned the fact that they're going to come for Washington Jefferson, to which experts say, no, that's not happening. So then it was funny because the first piece we see was like in 2020, which was both the namesakes of Washington and Lee University perpetrated racial terror. The schools should be renamed. Now, I'm going to give a tip here, and I think this is important. This is specifically to my friends in the boomer category. Refrain from pointing out the hypocrisy of this article and the fact that it's literally in the Washington Post. I know it's easy fodder, it's super memeable. But the simple reality is the way that they view it is what's good for the revolution is good, what's bad for the revolution is bad. So there's no actual fixed like virtue. There's no actual fixed system of morality that you could apply the standard where you say like, hey, this is literally a newspaper article by the Washington Post. I know it's fun, but it doesn't really do anything for us. In fact, their perception of like morality being not fixed, like almost a parabolic arc, was phrased no better than by Barack Obama when he said I think it's the arc of morality is long, but it bends towards justice. So when we think about that as a conservative, especially right wing, but particularly conservative, morality is fixed for us. We're able to use our Judeo-Christian heritage. So we're able to look at Christianity and look at our Bible and look at some elements of common law and see where they're also repeated in biblical doctrine and be able to assess morality at any given point in history. So this is actually like we have a fixed system of morality that we're called to follow, and that is in fact best objectively as it assisted with creating the entire modern world. So this fixed system of morality is in stark contrast to the atheistic view, which is more that morality is malleable and in relation to power dynamics. And so what we see here is a perfect example of this, but where it entirely vindicates all the slippery slope people. So Washington Post, both namesakes of Washington and Lee, The school should be renamed. Let me see it yet again, because once wasn't enough. It's never enough for these people. So May 9th, 2022, George Washington University needs a new name. Yet again, which it's fun. We're having fun with it right now, but don't go anywhere and use this, because again, it doesn't matter. Any of these hypocrisy arguments will never matter. They called Larry Elder a more than adequate candidate for governor of Florida. I mean, he was our guy. This was our guy. And Larry Elder, chance to replace dude that looks basically like the Joker, but like even more white. Gavin Newsom. And what do? They tell Larry Elder is the black face of white supremacy. It's a patently absurd statement, but again, it fits in their worldview entirely like coherently. So this is why there's almost no point in pointing out the hypocrisy of these people, and it's just time to literally say no and not capitulate to any of their demands. Like you just literally have to say no. You have to realize that their entire worldview is fake. Everything that they believe is almost entirely fake. It's all born out of a entirely incoherent worldview, to where all they can really do is look at or attempt to look at power dynamics and use them where they're beneficial. And so in this case, they're going to, if Larry Elder was a guy on their side, very obviously they would be all about it. The moment that he's in opposition to them, well, he's a symbol of white supremacy. And the not beneficial historical conservative argument would have been like, oh, look who's a real racist. The thing is, again, this doesn't matter. Like, baked into progressivism is that morality changes. So if you point out something that seems to be inconsistent or that seems to be hypocritical, like they'll just look at you like, okay, like, so what? Like, either one, that changed, or either two, like I said, what's good for the revolution's good, what's bad for the revolution's bad. They fundamentally hate America. They don't like what it is. This is why they assault our shared heritage, culture, icons, and symbols. So I think we'll just close this out with Pat Buchanan, because Pat Buchanan's epic. It's pretty amazing. We look historically. We have Pat Buchanan, who maybe had the best like pop culture take on critical theory, which is, I think it was something along the lines of critical theory, which is the moral equivalent of digging up our ancestors and desecrating their graves. Like, so what we're going to do, critical theory, which is not a system of analysis, it's a system of critique. That's why it's called critical theory, not analytical theory. But we had a guy who was culturally on the level of understanding things like critical theory back in like the 90s. And instead, what do? We pick like Bushes. Like we could have had Pat Buchanan. Instead, we got Bush. So anyways, from his book, Death of the West, everybody should just read that book. Suicide of a Superpower is also good, and Suicide of a Superpower is on Audible, which is helpful if you're an Audible person. But Death of the West was the original. Suicide of the Superpower is kind of an update of that book, but from Death of the West. He goes through a little bit of speaking on some of our past evils in the country, slavery, Jim Crow, treatment of the Indians, which really wasn't what it should have been. But it continues here. By having internalized a guilt that gnaws at the souls, these Republicans, in their lifelong quest for absolution, are easy prey for confidence men like Jackson and Sharpton, who run the big sting. Pause quote for a moment. If this was written now, very obviously we'd have a great number of names we would need to add to this, such as Henry Rogers, and you may know him as Ibram X. Kendi. But yeah, Hannah Nicole, any of the other great number of racial grifters preying on the good-hearted nature of those in our country. All right, so continuing. The truth, in short, of slavery and the slave trade, Western man was among the many villains, but Western man was also the only hero. For the West did not invent slavery, but alone abolished slavery. Had it not been for the West, African rulers would still be trafficking in the flesh of their kinsmen. Slaves, after all, were the leading cash crop of the friends of Mansu Musa. In the Mauritania and Sudan today, slavery has returned to the deafening silence of intellectuals who have built careers in the moral shakedown of America and the West. America was a segregated society, but in no other nation do people enjoy greater freedom, opportunity, and prosperity than here in the United States. The time for apologies is past, but if Middle America believes that capitulations and reparations will buy peace in our time, it deludes itself. If there was no more demands, the race racketeers would have to find a new line of work. But as long as the silent majority keeps acceding to their demands, they will keep on making them. The time to just say no. Or time to just say no. And so this is what I would strongly encourage on essentially anybody out of our current progressive mob. Like, it's just time to say no. There's really no more ground to capitulate. I mean, this is a big part of it. Like, where do you really look around you and see where you can cede ground? But there's been a history of losing ground for 100 years with the hope of eventually one of these things that we do is going to buy us like some form of peace or some type of unity. And the reality is we can have unity, but it's going to come with seizing political power first, and that begins by just saying no. I mean, saying no to all these things is the first step. Roe v. Wade is another great step, but just saying no and realizing that political power, the contrasting opposite of using political power for evil isn't not using political power. That's basically been Republican Party's move for like 50, 60 years, was convince people don't use political power for any sort of cultural issue, and by mass capitulation, maybe eventually we'll reach a point where they realize that we're the nice guys. If we point out the fact that they're the actual racists, they're totally fine with denigrating Larry Elder because they're the actual racists, and maybe somebody will eventually believe us. Now, it'll never happen. So it's just time. You just say no when they come for you and say your viewpoint is one upholding white supremacy. You're just like, oh, well, I mean, I don't even know what you mean by that anymore. Like, okay, oh, your view is transphobic. Like, okay, the time is just to say no. So that's what we do.